Now talk about the Baal Shem Tov meeting Achiya HaShiloni, his Rebbe. In the Baal Shem Tov's writings, he's called Moiri V'Rabbi Baal Achai. That's what he calls him. My master, my teacher, Baal Achai. Baal Achai, B'Pashas means the master of Chaya Yechida. There's a Sirah from the Rebbe in Tafshin Yud Pinchas, and it's printed in the Sefer of Rabbi Bas Lagani Chalakal from the Yisofis, where the Rebbe explains why the Baal Shem Tov's Rebbe was Achiya HaShiloni. Because he brings up in Kabbalah, the Achiya HaShiloni was the one who divided Eretz Yisrael into two kingdoms. Achiya HaShiloni was the Navi who made it up in Nevat HaMelech. So he split the Jewish nation into two, Yehud and Yisrael. So the Rebbe says, the splitting of the Jewish nation into two was the beginning of the Churban, and therefore he has to bring the Geulah, which is the tikkun for the Churban. And since that the coming of Mashiach has to do with the spreading of Chassidus, therefore, Dafke, Achiya HaShiloni has to be the one who has to reveal that Chelik in Torah, which is Hachana and Achshara for the Bias HaMashiach, which is Chassidus. There's a letter in Igris Kedesh, an interessante brief, where the Rebbe is responding to somebody. It's not the Rebbe's Gedank. Somebody wrote the Rebbe a letter. And the Rebbe is responding. And if I'm not mistaken, the Toich in the letter is that this Yid wrote to the Rebbe, that we know from Kabbalah's for him. It says in Shirchei Arizal that the Arizal learned Kabbalah with Eliyahu HaNavi for 7 years. The Arizal was born in Yerushalayim. For those who do not know, he was born in Yerushalayim. And his father passed when he was a child. The Arizal's name is Yitzchak Bar Shleimeh, like you see it in the Azameh B'Shvach. And when he passed away, when his father passed away, his mother moved with him to Mitzrayim, to Egypt, I think Alexandria, because his mother had a brother. Arizal's mother had a brother, a rich man, and Arizal was raised in this home, and Arizal married his first cousin, he married his uncle's daughter, and he was the Precious for 7 years. He learned that with the Eliyahu HaNavi Torah, completely mufish from this world, and when he finished the 7 years, Eliyahu HaNavi told him to move to Ir HaKedesh Tzfas. That's the story of Arizal's life. So this Yid wrote the Rebbe a letter, and Teichne was that Arizal learned Kabbalah from Eliyahu HaNavi for 7 years. The Baal Shem Tov learned Chassidus from Achiya HaShiloni for 10 years. So Achiya HaShiloni is one generation closer to Moshe Rabbeinu. Achiya HaShiloni, I think, is the 7th from Moshe Rabbeinu. Eliyahu HaNavi was his Mamal HaMakom, was the 8th from Moshe Rabbeinu. In other words, Chassidus is higher than Kabbalah, v'harayeh, that the source of Chassidus is one generation closer to Moshe Rabbeinu. Eliyahu HaNavi revealed Kabbalah, and Achiya HaShiloni, who was one generation closer to Moshe, revealed Chassidus. And he also brought out the point in this letter that Kabbalah, learning of Kabbalah took 7 years, learning of Chassidus took 10 years. And he explains based on Chagas Nehim, Moichen, and the Rebbe. He writes this to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe sort of acknowledges that it's Oizgehalten. It's not the Rebbe's idea. The Rebbe is responding to somebody who wrote him such a letter. What is interesting is that the Baal Shem Tov never, in the Baal Shem Tov's writings directly, it never says the name of his teacher. It just says Meidi V'Rabbi Baal Achai. How do we know it's Achiya HaShiloni? Because the Toldos Yaakov Yosef writes in a few places that my Rebbe told me that his Rebbe was Achiya HaShiloni. So we know from the Toldos Yaakov Yosef, who's really the greatest source, one of the greatest sources of Teres Baal Shem Tov is in his Sfarim, that the Baal Shem Tov, it says in several places in the Toldos Yaakov Yosef that his Rebbe was Achiya HaShiloni. Now in the letters it says as follows, that the Baal Shem Tov lived 62 years. The Fiyah writes in the Sichas, and that the 62 years that the Baal Shem Tov are divided up into 3 parts: Havaya Ne'elam, Havaya Nistir, a hidden Shem Havaya. The first 26 years when there was a Nistir. Havaya Agoloi, 26 years when there was a Rebbe. Begoloi, Bepashtus. And the 10 years in the middle when he learned Torah with his Rebbe Achiya HaShiloni. So it's 26, 10, and 26. In fact, in some place, I think it even says in Shirchei Baal Shem Tov, it says that Baal Shem Tov lived the same number of years as Shmuel HaNavi. Shmuel HaNavi lived 52, and Baal Shem Tov lived 62. Is it tells Bepashtos that the 10 years Baal Shem Tov learned with Achiya HaShiloni, for all intents and purposes, he Poshet was not in this world. Ubemele, the 10 years don't count, the Mele 52. 26 and 26, and in the middle you have 10. Now, the letters say as follows, that, or like it says the Lashon in the Sichos, that Chayelu is the Yimaladis of the Baal Shem Tov, B'nafshei, B'gufei, B'nafshei, U'b'nishmasei. Chai Elul is the birth of Baal Shem Tov physically, spiritually, and even more spiritually. He was born Chai Elul, Shnaf Nachas, 1698. On his 26th birthday, Chai Elul Tov Pei Dalet, which would be 1724, he met his Rebbe Balachai, and in Chai Elul Tov Tzadik Dalet, 110 years later to the date, Tov Tzadik, which would be 1734, he revealed himself. And there's a letter from the Baal Shem Tov where he writes that on Chai Elul Tov Pei Dalet, I met my Rebbe, and we started learning Bereshis. 10 years later, on Chai Elul Tov Tzadik Dalet, we finished La'einei Kol Yisrael V'nis Galesi. We finished the Chumash, took 10 years, learned the Chumash once upon him, V'nis Galesi, and he revealed myself. Now, what's the problem? The problem is that there's a Gniza letter which says very different Imam Dematzah. The Gniza letter describes a snowstorm. Chai Elul, there's no snow. Describes the whole Sipur. The Baal Shem Tov writes a letter to his Shvogel, I think to Geshem Kitterer, Medachzach, where he's telling the story of how he met his Rebbe Balachai. And he tells the story that it was Erev Shabbos, and he went to the mikveh. When the Baal Shem Tov came back from the mikveh, hat sich zugelegt, Kederach HaMakabal, we laid on Erev Shabbos at the time of Shina, and in his sleep, Erev Shabbos, he dreamt that he saw his Rebbe, very lichtek upon him, and Achiya HaShiloni told him that we're going to start learning, he should meet me between the second and the third mountain. I think they started learning outside of Brod, which is the city where Rabbi Geshem Kitterer was Rav. Then later they moved from Brod to a different place because the Baal Shem Tov was a nisted even from his own shvager who couldn't suffer the fact that his brother was such an amarit. But in the beginning they were living in Brod, and he told them we should meet between the second and the third mountain outside of the city. When the Baal Shem Tov woke up, he felt it was nepach lish acher. He felt like a whole new person. In fact, Friday night, when he was sitting and making kiddush and saying Shalom Aleichem, his wife asked him, she knew who the Baal Shem Tov was, she asked him if he's feeling okay, because she saw in him a big shinui. He became a new man. And it was Ad Kedei Kach, the Baal Shem Tov acted like a nish poshut. He sat in the shul fish the Pashta Yidden. His shvager, the Rav, Rabbi Geshem Kitterer, also asked him how he's feeling. And it almost never happened, but that Shabbos they gave him an aliyah. They never gave him an aliyah because he was officially a Pashta Yid. But the people felt that something is very unusual about him. And the same thing happened Motzei Shabbos when he was singing El Yo Navi El Tishbi. Again, his wife says, you look up Sunday, something is different. And he wasn't allowed to tell her. So Sunday morning, he went out of the city. We described it was around Vayeshiv Tzeit, as they shaped it. And it was an incredible snowstorm. And he fought his way through the snow. And he came between the second and the third mountain outside of Brod. And he met his Rebbe. And they went together into a cave. In the cave there was a table and 2 chairs and a candle and 2 Sfarim. And they sat down, they opened up the Sfarim and they learned. And the Baal Shem Tov writes, I had been in that place many times before. I never saw a cave and I certainly never saw tables and chairs. And they learned for many hours until in the evening my Rebbe told me it's enough for today. And he got up and he walked me back to the edge of the town. And he put his holy hands on my head, and he gave me a bracha, and I went home. And the following day, I went out again, and I met him. And every day this went on, that he would go out of the city, would meet his Rebbe, they would go into the cave, and they would learn. Upon him, later on, it changed. Until they went every day. The Rochas Gavan say that he would leave his home on Sunday morning, and he would come home for Shabbos. His wife didn't see him a whole week. And she would prepare for him food to take along Sunday. And when he came home Friday, the food was pushed, not touched. The man fasted from Shabbos to Shabbos. But it wasn't the Pshat that the Baal Shem Tov was fasting, it was the Pshat at vergessen essen. The Baal Shem Tov forgot to eat. A ganze Woche nicht gegessen. And so I don't know how long the Seder was that he would walk him home every night. But later on, he wouldn't go back to the city every day, he went home just for Shabbos. And the Baal Shem Tov writes, after we were learning for about 9 months, he walked me to the edge of town, and he asked me, do you know who I am? So the Baal Shem Tov says, no, I have no idea who you are. So he told me. And in the letter, it doesn't say the name, it just says, he told me. The name we know from the told us. In the Geniza steht nicht der Name, he told me his name. So the Baal Shem Tov said, I fell to the ground. I was overwhelmed with aim of a fachat, that I had this chus to learn with this neshama. In other words, Baal Shem Tov knew he was learning with somebody big, but that he's learning with Achiya HaShiloni, that the Rambam writes that Yetzei Mitzrayim Hoya. The Rambam writes with Har Sinai, Achiya HaShiloni. Katan Hoya B'mei Moshe. Then later he was in Nasi Yisrael. In the times of Shlomo Melech, of Lנדבות, and so forth and so on. He was from the Baal Shem Tov, and Baal Shem Tov was learning with him. And he was so moved by the fact that he had the chus to live with this person, he pushed fell to the ground. And this is my hashara, this is my guess, that they started learning Pashas Vayeshev Tzai. This was in the letter in the Geniza. They started, it was a snowstorm, Pashas Vayeshev. That's Mistama Yotes Kislev. 9 months later, it's Chayel Take. So B'meila, this is my own hashara, that there's no stira. So when the Frierdiker Rebbe writes that the Baal Shem Tov learned with Achiya HaShiloni for 10 years exactly, from Chayel Tov Peidal to Chayel Tov Tzalidal, that only begins from the time that Baal Shem Tov knew with whom he was learning. But according to the Geniza, they had been learning 9 months before he even told them who he was. This is just a resolution to a stira, which I think is a pretty reasonable resolution. But Baal Shem Tov learned with Achiya HaShiloni for 10 years. During those 10 years, Baal Shem Tov was not in this world. Because Baal Shem Tov, as you know, had a wife and a son and a daughter. She had a beis meziga, a beis marzech. She had a tavern, and she made moonshine. She made whiskey, and she supported the family. And Baal Shem Tov was an Elam Asal Yenim. And like I told you earlier, she would give him food on Sunday, and Friday he would come back. The food was untouched. During this 10-year period, he moved. He was in Brod. And Achiya HaShiloni told him to move. I think he moved to Tlust. I think he moved to his hometown. Baal Shem Tov was born in Tlust. And I think he moved back to Tlust, but I could be wrong about this detail. And they learned. So first of all, there's an interessante sipur that happened during this tkufa. During the 10 years that the Baal Shem Tov was learning with Achiya HaShiloni, the following episode occurred. That there was a group of bandits who had a hideout not far from where the Baal Shem Tov had gedreit. And they see this lonely man walking on the mountains. So they figured they'll attack him. And in those days, the best way to avoid being caught for a crime was to do an act of murder, because they didn't have forensics at all. So they figured they'll kill him, they'll take his money, and no one will ever know anything. But they saw Interessante shining on Mud Nazach. Hashem is walking up a mountain. The top of the mountain is pushed a cliff. There's a chasm, there's a crack in the mountain, And his mama, she's walking, and they could see that he doesn't have any simas lev. He's not aware that he's about to fall off a cliff. And the mountain opposite him comes towards the mountain he was on, and he keeps on walking, and the mountains separate again. And then when he goes back, the same thing happens. So these Ganovim decided that maybe it was a bad idea to start up with this guy. He looks like a Chaverman. So they befriended him. They asked him for bracha for tzlocha in their business, in their geschäft. And the Baal Shem Tov told them if they promise never to hurt a Yid, they'll get him a bracha. And the Hamshech HaSipur, interessant is that the Baal Shem Tov had told them that he wants to go to Eretz Yisrael. If you do it, Yudel Chittik writes that there's 3 times Baal Shem Tov want to go to Eretz Yisrael. We don't know 3 stories, we know 2 stories. I think he mentions Sefer Adita Maisa, but he claims, Yudel Chittik writes, Baal Shem Tov go to Eretz Yisrael 3 times, and that the first time he was still a Nister. But he told them he doesn't want to go by sea, he wants to go only by land. Now, the Welt sagt, was sagt the Welt? The Welt sagt, the Baal Shem Tov want to go to Eretz Yisrael to meet Erechaim HaKadosh. The Welt makes from Erechaim HaKadosh a gewaldige tzimmes. They say that the Baal Shem Tov, met Erechaim, Mashiach would have come. So, but in the Frierdiker Rebbe's Rishimis and Sichos, as far as I know, the Erechaim HaKadosh's name is never mentioned. But in the Polish circles, they make the Erechaim HaKadosh greater than the Baal Shem Tov. Baal Shem Tov wanted to meet him, and if he would have met him, but for some reason, by us in Chabad, there's no mention, as I know, from the Rabbeim. I'm not talking from the Sepurim Chassidim, but from the Frierdiker Rebbe's Igros and Sichos, as far as I remember, not once does the Frierdiker Rebbe talk about the idea that the Baal Shem Tov wanted to meet the Erechaim HaKadosh. But the story goes, the Baal Shem Tov told these Ganovim that he wants to go to Eretz Yisrael, and he wants to go dafka by land. So they accommodated him. They went on a hike, and they found the route. They found the way to go to Eretz Yisrael. Mustama took walking. It was a long walk. To go from Europe to Asia is nicht kaposhta ma'aseh. Through Turkey, obviously. They had to go to Eretz Yisrael without crossing into the sea. So they came back. And they told the Baal Shem Tov that they found the route And the Baal Shem Tov is now walking with Ganovim. And you have to understand that Ganav in those days, B'Pashin was also a Retzeh. A thief was a murderer. Because then, today you steal, you don't want to do a violent crime because, first of all, they don't look as hard for you. And second of all, even if you get caught, you get smaller punishment. In those days, you didn't want to get caught, you killed the person, and that's it. There's no evidence, no edus. So these are low lives. Mamish nidrik about yoinim. So the Baal Shem Tov is walking with these Ganovim, these Shedidim, for a mesh of weeks. And they came to a canal, a split in the earth, full of water. And the Ganovim took a tree, they lowered the tree to the bottom of the water, and they catapulted across. They jumped across. It's a sport. They jumped across holding this here stick. The Baal Shem Tov's turn came. He took the stick, and the Eibush opened the Hidduch of Baal Shem Tov's eyes, and the Baal Shem Tov saw that this is the entrance to Gan Eden. And he saw the La'at HaCherev HaMesapeches, which is described in the Chumash, which means a revolving sword. And the Baal Shem Tov understood that if he crosses, he's going to be killed. So he tells the Ganovim that he changed his mind. And the village gang came to Israel, and they were so upset. They were so angry. They wasted so many months to find him a route. As they're halfway there, he quits. Baal Shem Tov couldn't explain to them why he's about to Savinish verstanden. They went back. But the Baal Shem Tov also was thinking that he should waste so much time on a journey like this, Forek Eretz Yisrael, and Nishder Gangen, and so forth, until they came to a lake, a fresh water body. And next to the lake, the Baal Shem Tov saw a frog. And the frog was a freak. The frog was very, very big, the size of a man. It was an unusual frog. And the Baal Shem Tov saw that in this frog there's a gilgul of a neshama. And the Baal Shem Tov spoke to this neshama, and the Baal Shem Tov told him, he said, I lived 700 years ago, which means today you're talking almost 1,000 years ago. And I was a tzaddik. And once I was mezalzel in the Tilas Yadayim. I was mezalzel in the Tilas Yadayim, which is the Rabbanan Sachak. And because I was mezalzel in the Tilas Yadayim, I was ne'nash min hashamayim, I was punished from heaven, and the punishment was that I was given this yoyness that I couldn't pass, and I fell to Shel Tachas. I became a Baltaiva, I fell into the worst of Edis. And my oynish is that they're not even letting me into Gehenim. My neshama is misgalgal. I'm stuck here in the wilderness in a midbar. I'm not near a yishuv, so no yid is around to be maila my neshama. And for 700 years, my neshama is not even being allowed into Gehenim. Mutar d'ladaydi v'les tamadiyos. So Baal Shem Tov understood why the Eibush did arrange Bashgacha Pratas that he should take this journey. He took water from this lake. He made a shakal ne'ebedvarim. He drank the water, and the frog died. And the neshama had an aliyah. So Baal Shem Tov understood that the Eibush did arrange. Mesabav kol hasibas, ilas kol ilas. Baal Shem Tov should take this walk with these low lives that Yisrael he wasn't going to get. Baal Shem Tov never made it to Yisrael. But the Valley was Mesakin and Neshama. This gave the mice. As the 10 years drew to a close, they lived together for 10 years, all of a sudden, Achiya HaShiloni drops on the Baal Shem Tov a bombshell. A shock, a surprise. He was tricked. But the mice not. That after they finished learning, the Baal Shem Tov is going to have to reveal himself as a tzaddik, ois and eflois, a wonder man, a person who does miracles, who's going to be magala, new madrega, new chelik and teira, based on the principles of Yahavta Recha Kamoicha, which is going to prepare the world for Melech HaMashiach. So the Baal Shem Tov said to Achiya HaShiloni, I didn't sign on for that. Nobody wrote in the contract when we started learning that this is the price. So Achiya HaShiloni says, this is the only reason your neshama came into this world. You would never have been born. You wouldn't even exist. The only reason your neshama came into the world was for this purpose, and this is your shlichus, and this must be, and then hostinish kabbalah. And a very serious negotiations began. The Baal Shem Tov tried every way to get out of his galus. He didn't want Shum Befer to reveal himself. And there's two ideas brought as to why. What was the Baal Shem Tov's objection to his galus? Number one, there were people older than him. Baal Shem Tov was only 36. And in the movement of the Nistarim, there were Nistarim in the 70s, 80s, 90s. So if it's a movement of Nistarim, a hidden movement, it doesn't matter that the Rebbe is 36 and Talmidim are 60 or 70 already. But if it's a revealed movement, that Stam Anoshim, the regular people, see the younger man fierce with the Reuter board, the young man with the red beard is in charge, and the Yid with Weißer Bed sitzen, I remember, the Baal Shem Tov felt that it wasn't appropriate. That was number one. Number two, the Baal Shem Tov said, if and when I reveal myself, there's going to be a machlekes in Klal Yisrael that hasn't been for hundreds of years. Baal Shem Tov knew that his Gal is going to create a machlekes. In other words, the whole chassidus is v'haflecha kamaycha. Misham yarda sin aleilam fatik. Avos Yisrael, right? The Torah nitlas v'sholom ba'elam. Misham yarda sin aleilam. And chassidus had exactly the same experience. So the Baal Shem Tov said to Achiya HaShiloni, I don't want. Achiya HaShiloni says, "That's not kabbalah." And there's kama pratim to what happened next. The Achiya HaShiloni put a lot of pressure on the Baal Shem Tov, and the Baal Shem Tov didn't acquiesce. And the Baal Shem Tov went to his father's tziyun in Tlust, where his father's buried. With the choiz gebeten by his father, please go to Achiya HaShiloni and tell him I don't want to reveal myself. So there's a story in the Geniza Chasanis, a letter, with a peladik mais, ubagdoma. You know, I'm sure, and I'm going to talk about this with Shem next time, that there were four Baal Shem in succession, who all had a derech of Kabbalah Maises, as I'm going to explain to you Mitzvah in the next few discussions that we have on this. The first was Rabbi Yossi Paltiel, who the Friedrich Rebbe speculates in the Sefer HaZechrenis, was Makabah from the Arizal and Tzfas. Then there was Rabbi Yossi Paltiel, then there was Rabbi Adam Baal Shem, and then there was Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov. Rabbi Adam Baal Shem was still alive. And apparently the Baal Shem Tov actually met him. Rabbi Adam Baal Shem was still alive. And it's also very obvious that Rabbi Adam Baal Shem also learned Torah from the same Achiya HaShiloni. Because Rabbi Adam Baal Shem also says Mori v'Rabbi. In the Igros Kodesh that are printed now in the Geniza, Rabbi Adam Baal Shem also speaks about the Achiya HaShiloni, and he calls him my Rebbe, unser Rebbe, my Rebbe, your Rebbe, and so forth. Rabbi Adam Baal Shem was still alive. And Rabbi Adam Baal Shem, upon him, had gehat ksavim. He had ksavim, manuscripts, which are sacred. I don't know what they are, I don't know how old they are and where they are, that he had to get to the Baal Shem Tov. So first, he himself was looking for the Baal Shem Tov, and he couldn't find the Baal Shem Tov. And he went where the Baal Shem Tov was supposed to be. He spoke to people, and he was the Baal Shem Tov said to him. So the Baal Shem Tov realized that Min HaShamayim, they're not letting them meet. So he sent his son, and it says his son's name, and I forgot the name, but it says in the letter, he sent his son with these letters, and the son went looking for the Baal Shem Tov, and the same thing, B'shum Meifin, he cannot find it. So the son realized that Min HaShamayim, they're not letting him meet. So he did what's called Hashpas HaEvan. I mean, it's an interesting trick. Somehow you make an Evan, a stone, swear. How do you make stones swear? I don't know you can do that. And you can put the Ksavim into the Evan, and the Baal Shem Tov will come, he'll take them out. And upon him, that Milmailat needed to be through the Mtzos of a Goy. So the son of the Baal Shem Tov regulated Ksavim under a stone, in a stone, and he went away, Veistach. Vayeshev mineged, vayisas eina vayar, he watched. A shepherd had seen him put in the Ksavim into the stone, and he saw him leave, and he didn't know that he was still hiding. So he came to see what it was. He figured maybe it's a valuable, maybe it's a treasure. As he came close, the son of Adam Hashem comes out of his hiding place, and he runs up to him and says, "Don't touch it, it's holy. If you touch it, you're going to die." And he said to him, there's a younger man, Srul, they called him Srul. When Srul comes, show him this place, because these papers are for Srul. And the Adam Baal Shem's son gave this guy a very large tip, an incredibly generous tip. He says to him, remember, don't touch it. And when you see Srul, it had to upon him go through a guy. See Srul, you'll show him where the place. The Baal Shem Tov came, and this guy went up to the Baal Shem Tov. He says, Srul, I have a shlichus for you, that somebody was here, and he told me that he was looking for you, and he couldn't find you, so he left you in the stone paper. Baal Shem Tov went Taka, and he found the Ksavim, and he gave the guy a very large tip, and it was exactly the same tip that he had gotten from Baal Shem Tov. Baal Shem Tov tells this whole thing in his story. And in these Ksavim, Efrafashid and Emaises, amongst the stories that are in the Ksavim that the Baal Shem Tov got from Baal Shem is the story of his Neshama, the earlier Gilgul, that I told you about last time. But there's another story in the Ksavim, which is a Maisim Oyim V'Neir. Baal Shem Tov himself calls a Maisim Oyim V'Neir. The Adam Baal Shem writes of Yisrael Baal Shem Tov. He says, Pamachas, he says, one time by Shalashudis, or Isi Meiri V'Rabbi, I saw our Rebbe, his Achiya HaShiloni. And he said to me, right after Shabbos, you should be ready we're going on a trip. We're going to travel to the city of Brod, I think, which is a Meshach Zman Rab away. So right after Havdalah, he says, I went outside, and there was a wagon, and I got into the wagon, and there was sitting my Rebbe, Achiya HaShiloni. Remember, this man had lived literally almost 3,000 years earlier. And we sat in the wagon, and we traveled. And if I'm not mistaken, my Rebbe told me to sing Al Yoh Navi Al Yoh Tishmi. Al Yoh Navi Shabbat, I sang Al Yoh Navi Al Tishmi. And when I finished, my Rebbe told me, if you knew who was driving this coach, was the Gesessen and Gesessen Derech Eretz. You'd sit at more Derech Eretz, but he didn't tell me who it was. And when he finished, they were already outside of Brod. In other words, he had to fit us at Derech. They drove up to a house, and they went inside the house. And I sat down, and my Moiri Rabbi, the Achiya HaShiloni, started pacing the room. Now just imagine, you're standing in a room with a Jew who's literally 2,500 years old, as Nistallah Gavanim Metoizim to Yad Freya. You're sitting at a table, and he's pacing, several hours. I mean, it must have been so frightening. It must have been so scary. I mean, can you imagine? Several hours, and there's nothing happening. They're not talking, they're not exchanging anything, they're going to shkatilim gonisht. Pacing for a meshach man and after several hours, the door opens, and in walks a very tall man, a greaser shterem with a big forehead, and my Rebbe walks up to him and says to him, Shalom Aleichem Rebbe Eliezer. This is Baal Shem Tov's father, who had come from Elam HaEmes. And my Rebbe says to him, sit down. So Eliezer answers to him, I come from a world, the world in which I live, nobody sits and nobody stands. I'll stand. So now you have this. The brother Baal Shem is sitting, and Achiya HaShiloni, who lived 2,500 years ago, or Rabbi Eliezer, who had passed away, are standing. It must have been quite a tziyah. And Rabbi Eliezer says to Achiya HaShiloni, Mein Zun Yisraelik. That's how he begins. Mein Zun Yisraelik. My son Yisraelik is coming to me. And he's begging me that I should speak to you, that he shouldn't have to reveal himself. And I told you before the two reasons. And so I'm asking, we should be mevat. So Achiya HaShiloni says to Rabbi Eliezer, you should understand, the only reason your son's neshama came into this world, and the only reason he exists is for this. Anisht, nobody needs him. And you should tell him that he has no breira. Azayat megez again l'mayla. This is the decree made in the heavens to reveal himself. And you should tell him also that until he agrees to reveal himself, he will never see me again. Achiya HaShiloni punished him. He threatened him. You're not going to be in this gala. You'll never see me again. And then Rabbi Eliezer left. After Rabbi Eliezer left, so as I said, as big a lost drink in a case chamen, my Rebbe, Achiya HaShiloni, my Rabbi, said to me, the bottom of you can drink a case chamen. Once a Shabbos, you're supposed to drink hot water. So I drank a case chamen, a glass of tea. And then I went outside, and my Rebbe tells me, you go back. I have business in Brod. I mean, he needs a wagon from going from place to place. He can travel from world to world without a wagon, but to go from Chveis from Rapshitz, where the Rabbi Hashem lived in Rapshitz, to Brod, he needs a wagon. So I have more business in Brod, so I'm staying here, you go home. So I got back into the wagon, and the wagon driver drove, and this time I knew already that I should sit with more Derech Eretz, because I didn't know who the wagon driver was, but I knew that if I knew who the wagon driver was, I would have, a short time I was home. So Rabbi Baal Shem Tov, Baal Shem Tov, b'meili, you should understand, as the hastish kabrede. You must reveal yourself, this is why your neshama was born, this has to happen. Sure. And Baal Shem Tov was finally convinced that it's got to happen. So here you have to understand the tension. Baal Shem Tov B'Shum doesn't want this. And the Friedrich Rebbe, in one of his sichos, refers to Chayel Tov Tzadik Dalet, 1734, which is the official birthday of Chassidus. Chayel Tov Tzadik Dalet, 1734, was the official birthday of Chassidus. The great heilige glickliche Tag, that's what he calls it. The great, holy, fortunate day of the Baal Shem Tov's Galus. So the Baal Shem Tov is miserable, and the Friedrich Rebbe thinks it's the great, oitzig wunderbar, Shem Tov was in his Gala. So there's a letter from the Baal Shem Tov to his brother-in-law, of Gershon Kitter. Because it looks like upon him that even though when he was younger, Baal Shem Tov hid himself from Gershon Kitter. Gershon Kitter did not know who the Baal Shem Tov was. Faket. Gershon Kitter was a poshtarid who knows nothing. He read the Maika Omer. And he was very, very disappointed that his brother, his sister had married such an Am Haaretz v'chuli v'chuli ki yadua. But eventually, Baal Shem Tov did reveal himself to his brother-in-law, Rabbi Yossi Paltiel, and he writes him in his letter, I have to be Megala. I have to be Mizgala. I don't want to do it. And I'm very, very uncomfortable. May lebetech, come and be with me. He writes to his brother-in-law, I want at least to have somebody with me. And it says in the Sichas of our Rebbe, I didn't see it in the Sichas video, but it says in the that the Baal Shem Tov's neshama came down into this world. At the Ois Gepelt Lamaila, they should have Shishim Gibayim. That even though the Baal Shem Tov's Indian was to be Megalach Sidis, and Baal Shem Tov has to do his job, the Eibishter gave Baal Shem Tov a matana, 60 tzaddikim that should be with him, 60. Now we don't know the name of all 60, but we know the name of, let's say, 35 or 40. There's people who write Rishimis like this, in Pelish Sfarim, who are the Talmidim of the Baal Shem Tov. But the Baal Shem Tov, Oid Gepelt, Mal Mailam, Zom Geben, 60 tzaddikim. And the Rebbe adds that the Baal Shem Tov told the Maggid, that just like Elisha was told by Eliyahu, Elisha was the Talmud of Eliyahu Navi, he's going to get double of Eliyahu. So the Baal Shem Tov told the Maggid also going to get Pishnayim, and by the Maggid there were 120 tzaddikim. And the Baal Shem Tov very painstakingly, very slowly and carefully and deliberately gathered his chavraya of 60 tzaddikim, and upon him one of the first was this Sergei Kittev, his own shvagir, his own brother-in-law. And he says to him, please come, I want you to be with me. I have to reveal myself, I don't want to do it. At least I'll have with me another God will be Yisrael, all about audience and another Gringe. And apparently, I mean, imagine, Geshem Kittever came. And Baal Shem Tov was Nizgala. And in the Shivchei Baal Shem Tov, he described how the Nizgalas happened. I don't remember the details. It's that Baal Shem Tov's ability to conceal himself didn't have to do with the clothing he was wearing. His face would look different. The entire Pnei Koche, when he wanted to look at Prost, man, his face looked Prost. And when Baal Shem Tov wanted people to see that he was a tzaddik, his face looks different. So something as Amin Maiseh, the Baal Shem Tov, people so passionate, his face would change like this, change like that. And the Baal Shem Tov settled in Meshbush. And in a very short time, it was misparsem that there is a tzaddik in Meshbush. And I'm going to explain to you soon that he wasn't Stamazei Val Primus Hatera. He was involved in a particular area of Primus Hatera, which is called Kabbalah Maisis, which we're going to talk about in Mitzvah over the next few Shmusen. And he's an Eisa Peller. He does wonders. Baal Shem Tov used to write Kameis, which our Rebbeim didn't do. And the Baal Shem Tov used to use Shemis. He was called Baal Shem Tov because he used Shemis HaKodesh. Do all kinds of inyanim nifloyim, which was in the derech of the Kabbalah of the Arizal, as opposed to the Kabbalah of the Ramak, like it says in the Sefer Zechrenis, which I'm going to share with you, Mitzvah Hashem, that the Baal Shem, that the difference that Arizal and the Ramak, amongst other things, was that Arizal was Esik in Kabbalah Maisis. Now, you understand that a Yid in Europe, in those years, you're talking now, 1734, 35, 36, when did the Maisa with Shabtai Tzvi occur? And by Shabtai Tzvi, Shaipendach Yud Mem Shin, the story of Shabtai Tzvi occurred in the 1660s. Now you're talking the 1730s, but the effects, the ill effects of the kat, of the movement of Shabtai Tzvi were still felt. There were many Yidden who still believed Shabtai Tzvi was Mashiach. A Muslim and so forth. And the Baal Shem Tov appears in Europe. Nish Tama Makubal. But his Eisik and Kabbalah Maises and his Eisapella, and of course the most controversial, the most suspicious aspect of Baal Shem Tov's movement was that he was involved with Pashta people. He wasn't involved with Tzaddikim, with Gedei Yisrael, with Goinim. Prosta people, the hundreds and the thousands gathered around the Baal Shem Tov. Yidden were tzibroch and they were broken. The Baal Shem Tov raised their spirits, made them feel good. So the suspicions that fell on the Baal Shem Tov were extraordinary. Immediately there was a reaction. And people have different ways of reacting. Some people right away condemned. Some people first came, checked him out and condemned. Some people came, checked him out and said there's nothing to condemn. This is the real thing. And the Baal Shem Tov was in his gala and the Baal Shem Tov became a Rebbe. Now, in the Baal Shem Tov's years as a Rebbe, his 26 years as a Rebbe, he had thousands and thousands of followers. But, in addition to the thousands and thousands of followers, one Nekudah, which was very, very, very important, was the fact that the Baal Shem Tov gathered tzaddikim. He wanted also the Shishim Giboidim, as Dr. Tzug is Akmal. It was very, very important for the Baal Shem Tov not to be alone. And he gathered 60 tzaddikim, go'oinim neiroyim, who were members of the Cheder of the Baal Shem Tov. There's a ribu sipurim about this, and the Vesach by the Polishes, the Ona Shea Maisis, which, like the Rebbe says, in the Hetish from Shvei, the Rebbe came to Zechnish Falozin. But the Baal Shem Tov painstakingly gathered his tzaddikim. The Mashal, from the first ones who came to the Baal Shem Tov was the Toldos Yaakov Yosef. From the last ones to come to the Baal Shem Tov was actually the Mesicher Maggid. The Mesicher Maggid didn't show up till 7 years or 8 years before the Baal Shem Tov was nostalgic, and he pushed hand-picked his chavraya. The Mashal, the Michaelis Lotchever was Baal Shem Tov's cheder. Yeah, a Peilisher told me that the father of the Michaelis Lotchever, he's a Bitzikul Drabich. The Bitzikul Drabich came to the Baal Shem Tov. So this guy told me, the Baal Shem Tov said to him, "You don't need me. You say hacha from them." I don't believe any such stories. But the Chalei Fazid did say on the Peilisher, and the Baal Shem Tov became a Rebbe. And he revealed a new derech based on the principle of Avos Yisrael. And of course, the mishpat, the sisma, the slogan, the theme that Baal Shem Tov was constantly mentioning over and over and over again was Rachamon Liba Boy. The Rebbe shall leap tahat. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how much Torah you learn, how much godless you have, the rikir is to be sincere. And he raised up the Anoshim Pshutim, and told them how much the Eibishter loves them and values them and appreciates them. Now, we're going to make an interruption in the story for two reasons. Number one, we're going to go back in history. I want to give you a brief overview of Chochmas HaKabbalah, and I want to bring you to the different shittas about Kabbalah. First of all, Sfardim and Ashkenazim. Second of all, the Arizal and the Ramak. And how all of this trickles into the Baal Shem Tov, it trickles into Chassidus. And this will take a week or two. V'hashein is, after we do that, I want to also talk to you about Shittas Baal Shem Tov, just a little bit. In different aspects, what the Baal Shem Tov's Shitta was, and Kamuvim V'Gam Poshet, I'll tell you stories and so forth and so on. And afterwards, we'll continue the biography of the Baal Shem Tov.